online gaming. And that changed the way people thought about online gaming. And we did that from day one. No free period. You want to play online games, you have to pay $49. And so that business innovation led to a lot of change. And because we had a good service, it was successful. And that's actually become a big business at Microsoft and enabled them to reinvest and to continue to invest in Xbox Live. So the B is super important. The second is probably the most important, which is experience. And Microsoft was definitely a technically driven company. We would find a technology and then trying to find a way to turn it into a product. And what I learned, if I learned anything over my 22 years there, it was that actually it's not as much about that technology, it's more about the experience that you deliver. And the successful product is the one that puts a smile on somebody's face the first time they experience it. It's easy for us to forget, it's now we're working on almost 10 years of capacitive touch on devices and the iPhone. And everybody forgets that first experience people had when they did the little swipe on a phone, which now you take for granted. Now the problem is you never know what the swipe's going to do. But at the time, people would do the swipe and you'd think somebody had invented gold. But it was because of the experience. It was pleasant. Cool things happened. The right things happened. Another example of an experience side, you think about what Uber has done. And there's some really nice technology in what Uber's done, and we could talk about that. And they've done some business things too. But the best thing they did is they took a crappy taxi cab experience and turned it into a great experience. And if you think about all the things you love about Uber, and it's not all perfect, but if you think about all the things you love about Uber, they're actually experience things. I don't have to worry about tipping. I actually don't have to worry about paying, right? I don't have to worry about standing in the rain to get my car. I may pay extra, but I can pretty much always get a car. I don't have to call on the phone and go on hold to wait. The whole experience is dramatically better. And so much of what we think about in innovation is about that extra experience. And then finally, in the BXT world, technology actually does matter. So there are technical things like capacitive touch, like the combination that Uber has done with GPS and what they've done with the mobile phone and what they've done with cloud-based services. That actually is a pretty cool application of technology. And they didn't invent most of that technology, but they did an incredible job integrating it. And if you think about the search on the web, I used to run the Encarta business a long time ago. World's greatest encyclopedia, and also completely irrelevant. And the reason it's irrelevant is because Google came up with a search algorithm technology that enabled you to find things on the internet. And that was a pure technical innovation. The experience wasn't even particularly magical. And search today isn't still even particularly magical, but the technology is powerful. And so if you're thinking about innovation and all the things you do, the really successful companies figure out how to innovate at the B, X, and T level, and how to combine all three of those things into something that is special, whether that be for a consumer product or whether that be for a business product. And once we got our head wrapped around the fact that innovation wasn't a light bulb event, but was actually a thoughtful event about finding a consumer problem, thinking about the B and the X and T of it, it opened up a lot of new opportunities for us to do things in a new way. So maybe slightly a little longer answer to a question that you're used to, but it is sort of the opening thought for what we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess just to kind of clarify your career with Microsoft, so you started out, you were there 22 years,
yeah.
Started as a business manager, then led the marketing for Microsoft Office in the 90s.
Yep.
Took that from 20% to 80% market share.
That's about right.
And then led Xbox for about 10 years, a little more than that, right?
Yeah, that's right. My first job, technically, I was in product marketing before I was a business manager in Europe. And the first job in product marketing, I was a product manager for Learning DOS, Flight Simulator, and Microsoft Chart. One half winner and two losers. Not too bad. I did that for 2 years, and then I went to Europe as a business manager and then came back to work on Office.
Okay. So what was it like working at Microsoft? What was it like working with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer? And like, what do you think made them successful leaders?
Well, there's a bunch of different things I would say there. The first thing I'd say is that one of the things that made them successful, and I mean this with deep respect, they're very competitive people. They want to win. And for neither, it was never about the money for either one of them. That's easy to say in hindsight because they have a lot of it. But even at the time when the company wasn't super rich and super famous and didn't have super large amounts of money, it was never really about the money. They're just competitive people. And I know them both personally reasonably well, and they're not just competitive about what they did at Microsoft, they're just competitive, period. I think it's beautiful that Steve is now the owner of a professional basketball team, because he's going to be competitive about that. And he may be having a talk with Blake Griffin about slugging people on the team right now, but they're going to be competitive, and that's just the way it is. So the first thing I'd say is they're very, very competitive. Second thing, they believed in intellect. They believed in the meritocracy of a bright idea. And mostly that was good. It wasn't always good, because there were times when we would hire people just because they were smart and their IQ was high and their EQ was negative, and that created a lot of problems. But mostly the IQ in the place, and part of the reason I went to work there to begin with was I knew I was going to be in the bottom half of IQ on the team, and really smart people, if you can get them organized, can do amazing things. And so they believed in that idea that hiring smart people, even if it was general purpose talent and general purpose intelligence, would lead to great things. Final thing I'll say is, as you get to know people, you figure out how to get the best from them. And Steve and Bill were, they both have real reputations for being difficult in meetings. Some great videos on the web of Steve that are humorous in a way. What I learned, though, is that both of them as individuals are actually pretty amazing people. And I learned as a manager that the best way to get the most from them was to meet with them one-on-one, not in large groups. And so over time, we would do fewer and fewer big group meetings, because those felt more like performances, and a lot more small group, one-on-one, two-on-one meetings. If I was going to Bill, I'm not a technical person, so if I'd go to Bill and we're going to discuss chipset technology, I'd take our best chipset guy with me. We'd go have a two-on-one meeting. Bill would have a great conversation, give us incredible input, and I would learn everything I ever wanted to know about chipset technology in about an hour and a half. And those meetings were fabulous. If we did that in big group, it turned into a little bit of a show, and the meetings were much, much harder to manage. So, they're both amazing people, and I think they've contributed. Final thought I'll say, there's a long answer again, I suppose, but final thought I'll say, they will both, and Bill in particular, will be remembered in history more for what they've done after Microsoft than for what they did at Microsoft. I know Melinda actually better than I know Bill, and she's incredible in her own right, and the combination of what they're doing with the foundation, which is a really hard task. Putting to work the amount of money they have to put to work is actually hard. It's actually difficult, and to do it effectively. But I think they're going to change the world in important ways, and they will be remembered for that far more than they will for what they did with DOS and Windows.
Sure. And so when you were in the 90s, you were the top executive for Microsoft Office products, 20 to 80% market share. Just kind of generally, what do you attribute that success to?
Well, just so we get the record right, because I'll have friends who will see this video and correct me. I wasn't the top executive on Office. I was the top executive in marketing on Office. My best friend was actually the top executive on Office, so he would give me a hard time. His name's Pete Higgins. I think the success to that team was twofold. One, the Office team was incredibly focused on what people were trying to accomplish. They were very driven by what users were trying to do. So in our own little way, that Office subculture within Microsoft was actually not as technically focused as the rest of the company. They were more focused on what needed to be accomplished. And so they had this whole process called user-driven development, which didn't mean we asked users what to do, but what it did mean is we went out and observed and learned from users. So they did things that people do a lot today, but that were new then. They did this thing called instrumented versions. So they would send out to people a version of Word or Excel and ask them to use it, and that version would record every keystroke and mouse click the person would make in the product. And people would know this, and then people would send us the files, and they'd compile that over 1,000 people. And then they would look and say, what the hell are people doing with Excel? And as a great example, you find two things. One, people manage a lot of lists of things. Excel was a file manager. It was a database in the formal term, a flat file database, and we had no database management features. Maybe we should fix that. And it was a place where we were dramatically better, as it turned out eventually, than 1, 2, 3. And second example, what do people do in spreadsheets the most? They add up rows and columns all day, every day. And if you can remember back that far to the days before the toolbar, adding up a column of numbers was actually kind of tedious. And if you wanted to do it 20 times in a row, it was no fun. And literally this guy named Chris Peters was looking at the data and said, we need to make it easy to add up numbers. And over a weekend, he wrote the sum function in the little button that's on the toolbar. You press the sum button, magically it finds rows of numbers and offers to add them for you automatically. And so it's that kind of innovation. So that user-driven development thing was super important. And then the other thing was super important is that team was fast development before fast development existed. In the context of the world at the time, the development team for Word and Excel actually turned that product with great regularity. In the context of the time. It would be considered slow today, but in the context of that time, very quickly. We did 3 versions of Excel in the time it took Lotus to do 1 version of 1, 2, 3. And probably about the same on Word. WordPerfect was actually a little bit better, but probably about the same. And when products are changing so quickly and you're moving to graphical interface, pace of development mattered a lot. And suddenly we were lapping them in reviews, and that started to turn people. And finally, there was a bunch of business innovation. We sold Word and Excel together. Lotus couldn't sell 1, 2, 3 and WordPerfect together. And when word processing and spreadsheets became enterprise products, and IT guys wanted to buy them under one contract, we had the best rated word processor, the best rated spreadsheet, and the only one you could buy at the same time. And that shifted a lot of market share in the enterprise business side of the equation.
Gotcha. Was it a challenge at the time to convince people that have been doing the same thing routinely? Is it a challenge to change how they always did things? I know a story about an audit team that kind of with the columns, this audit team, and this was for months, they would still hand sum all of those columns, even because that was how they always did it. Was it a challenge to change that? It
was. The thing that helped us, we had one sort of exogenous variable that helped the Office team quite a bit, which was this move from DOS to Windows. And if you're a Mac person, you're sort of going, well, so what? And you're right. But we were already ahead on the Macintosh, so we didn't have this problem on the Macintosh. But in the PC-based world, Lotus and 1, 2, 3 dominated in DOS. But the shift to Windows changed the way everybody worked. It changed people's habits, it changed the way they interacted with applications, it changed their expectations of what would happen. And so in a funny way, that transition kind of threw all the cards up in the air and gave the team the chance to take advantage of that. And that's where the rapid pace of development really helped us, because you had the cards up in the air with a new interface and new ways to do things, and us producing constant innovation, again, relative to the time, and put us in a position where market share actually shifted over the course of maybe a 3 or 4 year period, which is pretty fast in the context of what was going on then.
Sure, yeah. And I guess, kind of more broadly, there's a lot of people out here that are kind of trying to change their particular niche industry or convince customers to do a different thing. So, what do you have to say for a company trying to convince their customers to change things?
I think a big message I'd say, and we certainly face this on Xbox, you have to find a combination of nice enhancements in the thing they're already doing and that they already expect, along with 1 or 2 things that are leapfrog different that change the game a bit. And so there's a combination of imitation improvement and continuous improvement with discontinuous disruption that has to happen. And so to give you an Xbox example, there was a lot of stuff that the original Xbox did that was exactly what PlayStation did. Very, very similar, both technically and in the way the consumer interacted with the product. But we made a huge bet on Xbox Live and broadband. You forget, we committed to broadband in 2001. Broadband sucked in 2001. And it's really easy for people to forget that. It mostly didn't work. We had an argument with Bill Gates for 2 meetings about whether we should have a 56K modem in the first version of Xbox. And he really thought it was stupid that we were going to take it out. So you forget how big of a bet that was. But that was a huge step function discontinuity in the space. And so if you're able to execute on producing the things they expect, maybe a little bit better, a little bit more pleasantly with a little bit better experience, but then also innovate in a discontinuous way in an important area, then you've got a real chance to drive change for people. The truth is, if you're a fast follower and you're behind from the beginning, just being a fast follower from a behind position is a really bad place to be. See Microsoft Zune. If you want the business case on that, I can tell you, I ran that business and that was not a pleasant experience. See Windows Phone. I mean, these are examples where the companies really struggle with how to get discontinuous innovation into the marketplace. And so you really got to think that way. You got to think there's the necessary everyday stuff that I have to be as good or maybe a little bit better, and then there's something I have to do that just wows people and stands out. And sometimes that's hard to do. The example I'll give in the music space, we decided to chase iPod, and we should have skipped to subscription music services on the phone. Zune, the music service, was Spotify 4 years before Spotify. And if you actually go, unfortunately I still use it. And if you use it, it is Spotify 4 years before Spotify. But because it was tethered to a piece of hardware that was chasing iPod, nobody cared. If we had the foresight to leapfrog and bet on phones and bet on the subscription service, we would have been in a different place. Hindsight's great, by the way. But that's the easiest way to explain why that works the way it works.
Sure. Okay. And then kind of transitioning more into your Xbox career, in 1989 was when the project was started. Why did Microsoft decide to get into the video game industry? I mean, in your book, you initially thought it was kind of a crazy idea.
Well, I did. And, in a way, it was. But you have to understand, I have this theory about things that every project you have has to have purpose. And purpose is a one-sentence statement about your North Star and what you're trying to accomplish. And Microsoft had a purpose statement. They didn't call it that, but they had a purpose statement. The purpose statement was a computer on every desk and in every home running Microsoft software. If that is your purpose statement, and Sony says they're going to put a living room computer in the living room, you feel a competitive threat. And Microsoft did not have a non-business, non-office entry in the home. And the fear was that Sony was going to enter the home in a way that would dominate the media space and give them a computer in the home. Now, it turns out the PS2 was actually a great gaming console, which is why it wasn't a computer really. But it was a great gaming console, but it didn't have the general purpose capabilities of computer. But that's the way they talked about it. And that put people at Microsoft on alert. And so once you accept that premise, now the point isn't, Microsoft wants to go do a video game console. The actual point is Microsoft wants to put its stake in the ground in the living room. And the best way to put your stake in the ground in the living room at the time was a video game console. It's a place that had the most traction. It's a place where we actually knew something about the technology. It's a place where there was consumer engagement. And in theory, although we managed to disprove this for 5 years, in theory you could make a lot of money there. We lost a lot of money for 5 years and then made it all back. But at least it looked like there was an opportunity to create a business while we did it.
Sure. And so the initial unveiling of Xbox in 2001, it didn't go exactly as planned. How did that?
That would be the understatement of the century.
Maybe I don't know if you want to get into that. Or
no, sure. No, it's a good story. It's a good story because the first version of Xbox was sort of incredibly hard project with no strategy. It was ship a console by this date. It has to be super fast, super powerful with big explosions. And that was the strategy. I'm exaggerating a bit, but that was mostly the strategy. And the timeline was stupid. It was 18 months from start to finish, which means the hardware had to be done in 11 months. Microsoft's largest hardware product at the time was a mouse. Okay, so we get to E3 5 months before we're supposed to launch, and it has been 12 months of fire drills. Every day was a fire drill. Nothing was strategy led, so you just worked on whatever was burning the brightest on that day. It was a horrible period in my professional life. And in my personal life too. So we get to the day for the launch, and the guys come in the night before, and we're so disorganized that we rewrote the presentation 3 times the night before. I left at 2 o'clock in the morning from the venue without a speech because we rewritten it so many times I wasn't sure what we were going to do. So I went back to the hotel room, wrote the speech. We had an outline for the next morning. We then subsequently changed it the next morning at about 7:30. And we made the decision to show the Xbox turning on for the first time. This is, by the way, a bad thing to decide to do. So I get on stage, and look, Sony was brilliant. They had their event the night before. They then had a party after the event. So I'm at 8 o'clock in the morning with 150 hungover journalists. So this is really not a good thing. And I go to turn on the box, and I don't even get the Microsoft blue screen. I got nothing.
And this is how many people are in front of you?
Well, there's the journalist plus another 200 people. So there's about 400 people. And this is the big unveiling. Right? Subsequent to that, one of our big deals was Electronic Arts had agreed to support us. And with all deference to the Electronic Arts guys, they did agree to support us, but we sort of got the B team, to be fair. And I think Larry Probst, if he was here, would admit that. And their demo at our launch event consisted of a pirate game, and the guy couldn't get the demo to work, so it was 10 minutes of a ship running ashore on the rocks. Which was quite the metaphor for the entire event. So, and then just to cap it off, this is also the time we're going to show Halo for the first time. So we chose not to do that at the launch event, thank God. But we chose to do that on the floor of E3 in the Los Angeles Convention Center. And Halo, for those of you who know the story, started on the Macintosh, moved to the PC, and then got moved to the console. And you might think, well, it's a first-person shooter. That should be a successful category. There were no first-person shooters in the console world at that time. There had been exactly one in the history of video games that had been successful. James Bond title on N64. GoldenEye. See, people know. Only first-person shooter that was ever vaguely successful. Halo's on the floor. We're demoing it. It's awful. I mean, bad. So bad that the Halo team wouldn't let anybody else talk to them for 3 months. They basically locked themselves up, and we made a lot of mistakes. We just shouldn't have shown it. We were on beta hardware. We weren't on the final chipset. They'd been developing on a slightly different combination of chipsets, so the product looked bad. It wasn't ready to be demoed. It's a classic case of a team trying to do too much in an unorchestrated manner, fighting fires to the very end. And thankfully, the Bungie guys successfully rescued that product and produced one of the, probably saved Xbox. Halo and Xbox Live were the saviors of the original Xbox. And they saved that in time for the launch. But 3 weeks after that E3, I resigned from Microsoft. Or at least tried to anyway. And so I wrote a very compelling, convincing letter to my boss about what an idiot I was. And he didn't accept it, and we had a long discussion about it, but that tells you the depths to which we had sunk at that time. Mm-hmm. Vivid memories. I still get flashbacks. I still get flashbacks and goosey about it every once in a while. And you can watch this all on video if you want. If you go on YouTube, it's all there for the watching. It's not pretty.
And so I guess, how did that experience and how did the initial Xbox experience, how did that contribute to your 3P strategy, the framework that you mentioned?
Well, what happened is the first version of Xbox was a successful failure. We had 20% market share and lost $5 to $7 billion. So foothold, but a pretty big investment. For those of you who are thinking about starting companies, you don't get to lose $5 to $7 million out of the gate. So that was pretty bad. And the team stepped back and said, look, this idea that we're not going to be strategy-led is broken. And so we stepped back and developed this thing we called the 3P framework and a process we called 330-300. And basically that says we had to write for the second version of Xbox, which was codenamed Xenon, a 3-page document that told the team the purpose of the product, the 5 principles we were going to work under as a team, and the 5 priorities to make it happen. And that all sounds really logical and easy, and it's actually super hard to do. You eliminate in the priority section 5 things that people think are important. And you just tell them, no, those aren't important. If they happen, it's fine, but I don't actually care. When you write your purpose statement, you get to write 1 sentence that tells people the North Star for what they're doing. It's actually really hard. Once you do that, though, the management team empowered another group of people to write the 30-page document, which actually became an 80-page PowerPoint deck. That was the detailed plan for the product. And then the development team wrote what was supposed to be a 300-page spec, probably ended up being 3,000 pages for the product. But all those decisions got made by the team. And the management team didn't have to make them. And so things cascaded down through the group in a way that was incredibly powerful. And we still had, some bad processes where things would end up on my desk that shouldn't. I mean, none of this was all pretty and perfect. But it changed the nature of the team. We went from being the United Nations to being Team Xbox. And I mean that literally in the way we operated. The first version of Xbox was the United Nations. I was the Secretary General, and it ran about as well as the UN runs. And the second version of Xbox, while it was not perfect, given the scope and scale of the project, was a pretty well-oiled machine and worked really well. And the difference showed up in the product. Xbox 360 sold 4 times as many units, over 80 million units, double the market share, and made, I don't even know, probably $7-8 million difference in profit. This idea of being strategy-led is super powerful, and I've now taken that, in addition to writing it in my book, I now use that in the work I do with nonprofits, I use that in the work I do with civic organizations, I use that in the work I do with governments to try to address community issues. And it's a really simple framework. You don't need any special education. It's actually hard to do, but when you take the time to think about it, it really does work. And it works really well for startup companies to try to get them focused and thinking about what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. And so you talk about having no more than 5 priorities. I mean, that must have been hard at Microsoft when you have billions of dollars behind you, where you can effectively do whatever you wanted. That must have been a challenge to.
Well, yeah, having the money was actually a liability, honestly. The fact that there wasn't scarcity of resources was really a problem. In the middle of working on Xenon/Xbox 360, the team decided, some people on the team wanted to go do X-Boy, which was a handheld console to compete with Game Boy, which is yet another completely different business, a different product, a different set of technologies. It has almost zero leverage, it turns out. People think it has a lot of leverage. It has almost no leverage with what we were doing. And the company could have afforded to do that. And we probably could have made the case and maybe gotten it approved. And you just have to be disciplined and say, no, we're not going to do that. And that was the most egregious example. But you had to say no kind of every day. Microsoft was in, 80 countries. The general manager in Israel wants Xbox in Israel. It turns out launching Xboxes in Israel is pretty hard. They speak English, so it's not a language problem, but it's a market definition problem. And by the way, then we're going to have to do it in every Arab state as well. That's just true. Just reality. And, that's for, we would have been chasing 50,000, 100,000 units. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of being ruthlessly focused and really hardcore with yourself about what matters. Now, you may pick the wrong things, so you may be unsuccessful. If you pick the wrong 5 things, it's really bad, because then you've been focused on the wrong things. But if you get the things right, it drives the team in an incredible way. And by the way, number 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 do get done if 1 through 5 get done well. The team frees themselves up and they find ways to do other things.
So it's a lot about saying no to people?
It is. The most clarifying thing you can do for a team you're leading is tell them what not to do. It's the most clarifying thing. And hard to do. Hard to do because people are eager. They'll say no, but that's important, and you got to tell them no, actually it's not. These are the 5 things that are really important. Let's make sure when we get those done, you can come back and talk to me again. And so saying no is an art form. That's important.
And so then, I'd also like to talk about what you've been up to since leaving Xbox. You wrote a book, Xbox Revisited, which I read. I really enjoyed it.
Good.
So
I got one sale. That's good.
That was actually Scott's copy. So.
Oh, that's good. So I got. So basically, you pirated my book. So that's the. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so in the book, you talk about being a civic engineer.
Yeah.
Kind of. What do you mean by that?
Well, first thing you have to note is I'm not a technical person at all, and I really just wanted to be an engineer, so I coined the phrase civic engineer. But the real idea is, how do we engage in our communities to make our communities better? And I can think of that as our local communities, I can think of that as our state communities, I can think of that as our national and even international community. But the real question is, what are we going to do as individuals beyond what we're doing in our business life and beyond what we're doing in our personal life to make our communities better? And how do we engage to do that? And part of the problem is people don't actually have a framework or a set of tools to think about. And so I think about it in the context of the 3P framework. I think about it in the context of BXT. Just think if we could get government to apply a little BXT to what they do, right? And get them to rethink the ways they do some things. Think about what would happen if we got government agencies, corporate people, and nonprofits aligned around a particular issue with a 3P framework that had a unified approach to solving a problem. When that does happen, things change. And it's incredibly powerful. And unfortunately, it just doesn't happen very much. So I was talking with somebody earlier. In fact, I was talking with Scott earlier. Scott, you'll give me the right statistics, right? What was the average age? So this is a question for the audience. Average age of the people who voted in the last election for the mayor of Madison?
62.
Correct answer. 62. What percentage of eligible voters in Madison voted?
12.5%?
21.
Oh, okay.
Which means that 12.5% of the people elected the mayor. So what your community has done is you have allowed 12% of the people to decide the future leadership of your city. And I'm not being rude, that's just the math. And by the way, you've allowed one generation to decide the future of your city. And they get to vote, no offense. I would probably be actually in that group. So they get to vote. But the point is that if we're not all engaged civically, we're basically taking a huge part of our life and making it a random walk through possibilities. And mostly what that means is we get problems. And we get problems that look intractable, and they're really annoying, and then we bitch about them, but we get what we pay for. And I'm not talking about taxes, it's what we pay for in our personal time, our personal energy, and our personal focus. And so, I've been a huge believer in civics, the idea of civics all my life. And so, in the work I do and the discussion of the book about halfway through takes sort of a right turn from talking about Xbox land to talking about civics, and it takes all the lessons from Xbox and applies them to civics. And I actually write a 3-page document for the U.S. government, which on one level is a stupid exercise because I'm no expert. But I did it because I wanted to show that you could take a framework at a national level, if you wanted to, and actually apply it in a way that would force people to make decisions and make trade-offs. And my preference is to do those things locally, but it at least makes the point, and that's what the book is about.
Yeah, and I mean, I love that you have your 5 priorities, and I think that's really important that you actually make decisions and make choices, and you have to talk about the trade-offs that you make.
Yeah, it's funny if you did this discussion, if we did a brainstorming session on the most important things in the U.S., and this is a particular problem when you talk about the country. It'd be less of a problem if you were talking about Madison, but if you're talking about the country, we'd end up with a list of 20 things. And everybody in here would be passionate about some of them. And so the question is, how does our political process and our civic process work for us to reach a consensus on what the 5 most important ones are? And I pick 5 in the book, and they're not the same 5 that everybody in this room would pick. And that wasn't even the point. The point, whether I right or wrong, is sort of irrelevant. The point is, you go through the process of thinking about it. Ask yourself this question. When you're listening to somebody who's running for election, do you know what their top 5 things are? And if you think you do, are they the same thing when you hear them speak to the other group the next day?
Yeah.
really enlightening when you think about it in that context. And what you discover is politicians, by definition, aren't very disciplined about it. And they try to please a lot of groups. It's the nature of getting elected. And the lack of discipline carries over into the way our governments actually operate. And that's not the politician's fault, that's the voters' fault. And it's corporations' fault, it's nonprofits' fault. It's all the people that need to be engaged on civic problems. It's our fault for not addressing that issue and forcing that level of discipline.
All right, well, thank you so much for talking with us, Robbie. We're kind of crunched on time here, so
yeah.
There's a lot of people in the audience. I want to give at least 15 minutes or so for Q&A. So Hannah is around. She's in the back. She has a microphone.
There's also some mics in the middle.
There's also microphones right in the middle there. So if you do have a question, please step forth and let us hear it.
The best ones to use.
Yeah, so the middle ones are the best ones to use.
All right, who's going to be the first brave person to ask a question? There we go. We got somebody.
Hi. Do you have any suggestions for incentivizing actual participation in a civic framework as far as civic hacking, technological, or open data initiative type stuff? Because the world gives us data, but it doesn't give us a reason to care, and that's usually the problem. I don't understand the mechanism to actually get people involved, even if the technology or the systems are there.
Yeah, it's on one level it's a fair question. On another level, the smartass in me wants to just say, well, you're a citizen, it's what you need to do. It's self-interest. You get what you pay for. But to your point, we have an information delivery problem for sure. The information people get about what's going on in our civic communities is not unbiased. It's not free-flowing. And one of the tragedies of the internet is it's mostly destroyed newspapers. And it's damaged the quality of editorial in newspapers in a serious way. And that's not enough. I'm not trying to be offensive to the people who work with newspapers, but the quality of editorial has gone down. The economics are out of it. They don't have as many editors. They're chasing the news, trying to be the first to report things, and the quality goes down. And so the biggest thing I would tell you is we need to find better ways to deliver people information. The publication I read the most actually is a publication called The Week. So if you haven't heard The Week, go check it out. What The Week does is they have their own editorial point of view, so you'll see their editorials, which is fine. And this comes in print and on the web. But what they also do on issues is they will present both sides of the coin. And they actually present a compendium of thought from across the political spectrum on every issue that they address. And so as a consumer of information, I can get the full range of what's available and then try to decide where I am. And I think information delivery and getting people to really understand what the issues are is the biggest part of motivation that needs to be addressed. Yeah.
Many of the textbooks reflect on the history of the 1990s and Microsoft's linkage to the internet, and the notion that Bill Gates didn't get the internet is often reinforced.
Sure.
To reflect on that period. And one more question. Microsoft today is being criticized from a number of camps for hiring people from abroad rather than training within for many positions. And I know that you're not responsible for what's happening today, but could you enlighten us?
No, sure. I'm happy to talk about both those issues. I suspect that to say Bill didn't get the internet is perhaps a leading phrase. What I would tell you is I don't think he or most other executives at the company understood the tidal wave, literally to pull from his memo, the tidal wave nature of the internet. They didn't understand the topspin that was going to come from engine, and in the world in which you think about editorial quality, the internet and the world in which you think about narrowband, the internet didn't seem as big of a deal. And there were three guys who wrote a think tank memo for Bill, who convinced Bill to change his mind. There's a guy named Brian Fleming, a guy named Jay Allard, and a guy named Steven Sinofsky. And Steven went on to be a president of Microsoft. Jay went on to be the godfather of Xbox. And Brian Fleming is the CEO of Sucker Punch Games and makes games for Sony. So they're both really smart in their own right. But they wrote a memo, and the great thing about Bill is he read, he listened, and he absorbed. And he reacted really quickly. I mean, we had just launched Windows 95. People forget the timeline. We had just launched Windows 95, and within 3 months, he issued this Internet Tidal Wave memo, and the company had to pivot on a dime to do something that we hadn't even thought about before and wasn't in anybody's plan. So, to your point. To your question about hiring, here's what I would say about Microsoft, and I think if there was somebody here from Google, Facebook, other places, they'd say the same thing. Microsoft hires for quality. Pretty straightforward. And I will tell you that today, Microsoft doesn't care whether you come from Zimbabwe, the United States, Canada, Antarctica. If you're a great developer, they want to hire you. They have somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 technical positions open at any one time. And if they could and they would hire more people if they could get them to Redmond and visas. There's a whole immigration thing I won't go into. But the point of the fact of the matter is it's all about quality talent. If talent was in the United States and Microsoft felt like they could do the work, Microsoft would hire them in a heartbeat because they're cheaper hires, they're better hires, they're more stable, the communication's better, all of that is good. But honestly, they're not thinking like nationalistic. They're thinking about how do I get great developers, and the great developers are from wherever they're learning. And it turns out there's a lot of great developers outside the U.S. Yeah.
I have is it on?
You're on, good.
I have a civic engineer question,
Sure.
It's kind of question. So I'm a former editor of the city regional magazine here, Madison Magazine, and now I write a column on startups for Madison Magazine.
Cool.
I also work for that organization up there, the Madison Community Foundation.
Cool.
So the connection between business and philanthropy is fascinating to me, obviously, and I just wanted to hear more about your thoughts on the Giving Pledge, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and how local communities can think about the bigger picture and connecting business and philanthropy.
Yeah, it's an important question. I think of this like a tripod, and I mentioned this earlier. So I'll get to the tripod in a second, but let me start with Bill for a moment. Bill's engagement in civics comes from his mom. His mom was on the national board of the United Way. She was very philanthropic. Microsoft started from day one with a giving campaign. You learn when you're at the company that you gave. And the reason there are so many Microsoft people in the civics and philanthropic world today, and why Microsoft's influence will be more felt in the civic world than it will any place else, is because of Bill's mom. I know that sounds kind of odd. The company has raised, through the employee giving campaign, something like $1.5 billion. And almost half of that is from employees. And the company matches up to $12,000. And the company matches hours worked as well, at a rate of like $25 an hour. So it's a powerful message about giving. To get to the tripod, we need the Microsofts of the world, the Facebooks of the world, to combine that effort with local government and with the local nonprofits. And we have to think about that in a united way. And we had no pun intended. You have to think about that in a unified way. And when it happens, it's crazy what changes. And it changes fast. The community can turn on a dime and improve very quickly. But any one of those by themselves, don't blame government. They won't fix the problem on their own. Don't blame the corporations for not giving back. It won't fix the problem on their own. Push those people to work with government and work with nonprofits. You guys do a great job supporting the Boys and Girls Clubs of Dane County. You should be proud of that. I see more corporate sponsorship there than I do in most Boys and Girls Clubs. It's powerful. Keep that up. And put pressure on your civic leaders to get behind things like that as well. And that tripod really can change things and can make things different. And there's a lot of companies in the tech space that don't do that. And that's a bit of a shame to me, and something I feel pretty bad about as a technology-oriented person. There's a real opportunity for technology companies to lead. Go ahead.
Currently in medicine, there's a tremendous emphasis on precision or individualized medicine, that we direct our effort, our technology, our science to that person specifically. Now, when you think about civic engineering, or you think about gaming, which so far is mainly a process of you play a person, you gain points, you gain ranking, you have some success. How does that become individualized so people do not compete to reach some point scale, but to build a unique legacy?
It's interesting. I think there are people in the gaming space, and gamers in particular, who are there for the competition and there to build points. There are also people there to have a social experience. I don't actually know that there is a goal in gaming to be an individual. I actually think entertainment is incredibly social. What's the greatest form of entertainment in the music space? Big concert with a lot of people, with a lot of energy, and your friends there. In a movie, sitting there watching a movie by yourself is fine, but it's way more fun when you're doing it with friends. And in the gaming space, I would tell you that the biggest thing for me is not can I compete to be the top or can I turn this into one individualistic thing. The biggest thing for me is can I meet my friends and can we have a good time? And when you can turn it into a social form of entertainment, you've changed the game. And it's a fun and powerful way for people to experience it.
And I'm sorry to interject. I think we only have time for about 2 more questions. We're a little behind on time, but just 2 more questions. And
I'm a little long-winded. Keep going. Go ahead.
Can you? I'll just yell.
You're on.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about organizational culture? You were at Microsoft for a while in a number of different settings. How did that change over time? What worked? What didn't work?
It's a great question. Microsoft does not have a culture. Microsoft had about 7 cultures. So if you worked in the operating system group, you did not like the Office group. Fact. The government was trying to create this collusion case between the Windows and Office, and the guys at Microsoft were laughing about that, right? The Windows guys would have loved it if the Office guys had said something nice to them. The SQL Server guys had a whole different culture. So the company had lots of different cultures, and that was the challenge with Xbox, is we inherited all those cultures because we brought people from all parts of the company. And then we added the crazies from the gaming world, and it was out of control, literally and figuratively. And so the biggest thing that happened with that 3-page document is it brought culture to us. And I learned, if there's 2 sort of meta things I learned through Xbox, it's the importance of design, back to my experience point. So if you're creating something, have a designer in it from day one, not halfway through the project. And 2, the importance of culture. And the importance of being intentional about culture. And when we defined what it meant to be Team Xbox, things really changed and the team started to make significant progress. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that one of the things that contributed to Bill's success was his competitive nature, but as entrepreneurs, we aren't even in the competition yet. What strategies would you have to really give a sharp edge to an entrepreneur who's trying to get out there?
The sharpest edge I would get for somebody who's starting is to be intensely focused on the people you're trying to serve. So be incredibly laser sharp about who your audience is and what it is you're going to do to put an experienced smile on their face. And if you can do that, you may find out that there's competitors who are not putting smiles on their face. And therefore you start a competition. But the biggest thing for me is can you do things that reach that customer and put a smile on their face? Sonos is a classic example of this. I'm on this board at Sonos, and they do really cool Wi-Fi distributed music systems. And they compete with a bunch of traditional speaker guys. And the Sonos experience in particular setup knocks people away. It puts a smile. They are so focused on their audience and so focused on making sure that first out-of-box, quick to music, play it in any room in your house experience is good, that they end up being competitive without trying, right? Because competitors can't keep up with that level of focus on the customer. And that really does lead you to lots of opportunity for success. You, my sir, have the benefit of the last question.
Okay, what an honor. Since you were at Microsoft for so long, I have a question about working conditions there. I presume that not everyone at Microsoft is a super genius on the cutting edge of technology.
That's true.
There's a large support staff. I'm
Sure.
wondering what working conditions are like for them, and do you have anything that resembles unions out there?
The company doesn't have anything resembling unions. There are they end up with issues in labor around their temporary workforce, probably the primary place where they have issues in that space. I would tell you that in general, the things you think about as working conditions at the company are actually quite good. People do work hard. The one thing that is challenging there, and it's not because anybody's running around pushing people to work hard, but it has a type A culture to it that people work hard. And that's Bill at the time, Steve at the time, now Satya, all the way down to the people who are in the support staff. And so it does put pressure on people, and this isn't sort of towards a union comment, it's just a cultural comment. It puts pressure on people to manage their work-life balance in a really strong way. And that's, I think, if there's something people struggle with at the company, and this is probably not unique to Microsoft, but if there's something people struggle from a workforce perspective, it's how do I maintain my focus, my love for what I'm doing, the passion I have for what I'm trying to drive, and at the same time do my civic duties and do my family duties in a way that I'm proud of and that balance my life. It's actually quite hard.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, to ask questions. Thank you to Robbie.
Thank you.
I also just want to run through our sponsors real quickly and thank them. Our event sponsors were PurBlue, Fine Point Consulting, Hardin Design and Development, Madison College, American Family Insurance, Madison Gas and Electric, Madison Game Alliance, Madison VR Meetup, Madison Public Library, the Doyen Group, Cap Times, Field 59 doing our live stream video, 100 State, Bendy Works, and Underground Kitchen, and our music partner M3. Thank you to everybody, and thank you to Robbie. How about one more round of applause?
Thanks. Enjoyed it. It's fun.
Well, thank you so much for an enlightening presentation. So part of Starting Block's mission is to bring like-minded groups together. What's going to be happening for the rest of the evening is we have several of our local meetup groups, Capital Entrepreneurs, the VR, Virtual Reality Meetup Group, and Madison Game Alliance will be here to answer questions about their group. They're going to come up in 1 minute to just tell you a little bit about each one of their organizations. Afterwards, you're welcome to join us for food and drink over in the lobby. We'll have the Talbot Brothers here as our musical guests. Actually, they're in town. They're originally from Madison. We'll be out in LA next week. Actually, one of our friends over at 100 State were the ones to introduce us to them. They said, these guys are in town. They were in Breaking Bad, season 3. If you remember the song, it'll bring you back a number of different memories. I just watched the show. I said, all right, let's bring them in to share this first Starting Block event with us. But with that, what I will say is find out more information about Starting Block. We're going to be doing events like this of these high-quality speakers. Our goal is to do an event pretty much once a quarter. So find us on Facebook. Go find us on Twitter. Go to our website, startingblockmadison.org. Sign up for our listserv and just get excited about the Madison ecosystem. We already see all the great things that are happening, not only in 2015, but what 2016, 17, 18 is going to bring this community. And with that, I'm going to bring up my good friend, Forrest Woolworth from Capital Entrepreneurs. He's going to tell us one or two things about our group, Capital Entrepreneurs. Thank you, Forrest.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you all for coming. And yeah, as Scott said, there are a ton of awesome things happening in the Madison entrepreneurial community. And Capital Entrepreneurs is a community and peer support group for Madison entrepreneurs. We were started in 2009. Basically, our community resource for Madison entrepreneurs. Basically, we do monthly meetup groups is the main thing that we do, as well as host events just like this throughout the year, including this event, Startup Weekend, as well as Ford Festival, and a bunch of other great stuff as well. Head to capitalentrepreneurs.com if you are not yet an entrepreneurial member. We have over 400 members. Any Madison entrepreneur is welcome to join and get involved. Our next event is actually next week. It's the 4th annual Madison Startup Fair on the UW campus. So the goal of that is to connect students with startups for job opportunities, as well as just informational opportunities about startups in the Madison area. So definitely, if you are a UW student or alumni, you're welcome to join for that. More information is on our website, capitalentrepreneurs.com. Also, definitely check out our annual yearly Madison Startup Scene recap, which we just posted last week, which had those numbers Scott mentioned about the awesome impact Madison startups are having and are continuing to have on our community. So yeah, check out capitaleNtrepreneurs.com. Thank you all for coming, and I'm going to hand this over to Dan from the Madison VR Meetup Group to talk about what they're up to.
Thanks, Forrest. My name's Dan Borkus. I'm a co-organizer for Madison VR Meetup Group. We're a pretty new group. We got started this past August. We've since grown to have over 200 members. We have a monthly meetup. We encourage you all to come and check us out. VR technology is coming. We have the consumer headsets coming out in a couple of months. But until then, check out some of our demos. We have free tables out there. And we're really excited about what's coming, and really appreciative of Scott and everybody here kind of bringing us into the startup community here. I believe Eric's up next from Madison Gaming Alliance.
Hello, thanks Scott. My name is Eric Frankson. I'm the director of the Madison Games Alliance. We're a newly formed group. We actually formed around last year's Forward Fest, and we've been doing great things, really acknowledging the growth we've seen in the game development industry here in Madison and in our region. Our focus right now is to help support our talent, see what we can do to grow them here and keep them here, and our businesses. Same thing, we're looking at entrepreneurs, we're looking at our industry leaders, and seeing what we can do to help them be great here in Madison.
Well, thank you so much for coming. Set up, grab some food, enjoy some music, and meet some new friends. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. And thanks again to Robbie for being our main guest tonight.
Do you mind if I announce our next event, or is it not? I missed it. I forgot my note. That's okay.